Top 100 Hidden Photographs You Will Never See in a History Textbook. Back in 1954, a photographer managed to bring together some of the brightest scientific minds of the century: Albert Einstein, Hideki Yukawa, John Wheeler, and Homi Bhabha, all standing side by side for a single frame. Across the Soviet Union, from the 1950s through the 1970s, it was a normal part of childhood for babies to be left outside for their naps, letting them breathe fresh air and take in the sunshine. Once morning had passed, parents would carry them back indoors so the day could properly begin. In 1911, a 4-year-old girl named Mary spent her days shelling oysters, working through 2 full pots of them every single day in Dunbar, Louisiana. Her mother, recognized as the quickest oyster shucker in the region, brought home $1.50 a day, frequently doing the work while balancing an ill infant in her arms. The picture stands as a stark reminder of how harsh child labor truly was in the early 20th century. In 1957, a man is seen snapping a picture of himself by rigging a wooden rod to release the camera's shutter, an early forerunner of what we now casually call the selfie, long before phones or selfie sticks existed. During the 1942 Battle of Singapore, a photograph shows Japanese troops using Sikh prisoners, their eyes covered, as living targets for shooting practice, a chilling illustration of the cruelty inflicted on prisoners of war. Leah Radic, one of the Yugoslav partisans who fought back against Nazi occupation, appears in a photo from 1943 as she is being carried away during an evacuation, a lasting symbol of resistance and refusal to surrender. Another photograph shows a donkey pressed into military duty, a small but telling reminder of how animals were relied upon during wartime efforts. After Allied forces freed the Bergen-Belsen camp in 1945, 500 children were found alive. A photograph from that time shows a handful of these young survivors, capturing an unforgettable and deeply moving chapter of history. In 1902, Santa Claus made an appearance in Chicago, and the photograph taken that day shows a far leaner version of him than the round, jolly figure we picture now, a small glimpse into how his image has changed over time. Another photo shows men lined up for bowls of soup at a kitchen during the Great Depression, one that was funded and run by the infamous gangster Al Capone in Chicago, revealing an unexpectedly generous side to a man mostly remembered for crime. On the 3rd of April, 1945, an American soldier stationed in Schinn, Germany, was photographed wearing the crown of the Holy Roman Empire, an artifact the Nazis had taken from Austria back in 1938. A photo from 1918 shows a young newspaper boy standing outside a theater in downtown Seattle that had shut its doors after Mayor Ole Hansen banned public gatherings during the Spanish flu outbreak. In October of 1937, Oswald Mosley, who led the British Union of Fascists, was struck in the head by 2 stones hurled from the crowd after he raised his arm in a fascist salute in front of 8,000 onlookers during a rally. On the 30th of September 1955, actor James Dean lost his life in a car accident in Cholom, California, while behind the wheel of his Porsche 550 Spyder. The photograph shows the mangled remains of the vehicle afterward. A photo from 1944 captures a dog mid-parachute jump during training exercises, underscoring the unusual roles animals were given in wartime operations. In Morgantown, West Virginia, in October of 1908, a young boy is pictured learning a trade from his employer, a man who had started in the very same job at the same young age and had already spent 30 years doing it, another window into the reality of child labor at the time. A photograph from June of 1936 shows August Landmesser standing alone in a crowd, arms crossed, refusing to give the Nazi salute. That single act of defiance eventually led to his arrest and his imprisonment in a concentration camp. Geronimo, the well-known Apache leader, appears in a photograph from 1886 alongside fellow prisoners following his surrender, a powerful testament to Native American resistance. In 1957, photographer Inge Morath captured a llama casually walking down a street in New York City for an assignment with Life magazine. Back in 1920, a young woman named Agnes Oliphant was photographed riding the waves alongside her dog, a rare snapshot of women and pets enjoying the ocean at a time when surfing was hardly common for women at all. A stunning colorized photograph from the early 1950s shows Brigitte Bardot standing before the Eiffel Tower, hinting at the timeless beauty that would later shape her career and leave a lasting mark on fashion and film. In 1945, a lone American soldier is pictured standing inside a European church, surrounded by priceless artwork and architecture, a quiet moment of reflection amid the turmoil of the Second World War, before he headed back toward the front lines. In September of 1939, a group of English soldiers posed together for a farewell photograph, their smiles hiding the grim reality that awaited them as the Second World War was just getting underway. On the 27th of May, 1972, comedian George Carlin was taken into custody in Wisconsin for breaking obscenity laws after performing his now famous bit about the 7 words you are never allowed to say on television. Back in 1916, young men across Germany had the option to sign up for military training, and this photograph shows one such young man wearing his own father's uniform, a reflection of the patriotic mood of that era. On the 27th of May, 1942, Reinhard Heydrich, one of the key figures behind the Holocaust, was assassinated in Prague by Joseph Gabčík and Jan Kubis. The photograph captures the scene left behind after this major act of resistance against the Nazis. On the 3rd of April, 1950, a purse thief in Germany was stopped in his tracks by a burst of colored dye fired from an early non-lethal weapon, a photograph marking one of the first steps toward developing such devices. A photograph taken on the 18th of March, 1871, shows a barricade set up at the intersection of Rue Voltaire and Rue des Trois Bornes during the Paris Commune, a socialist uprising against the French government. In 1928, Soviet peasants living under difficult conditions gathered to hear a radio broadcast for the very first time, a scene that highlights just how uneven access to technology and information was in the early years of Soviet rule. In 1952, Josephine Cobb came across a rare photograph while going through the National Archives, one that turned out to be the only known image of Abraham Lincoln actually present at the Gettysburg Address. A photograph from 1919 shows members of an American organization opposed to women's suffrage, taken just 1 year before the 19th Amendment was ratified, granting women the right to vote. Another photograph shows Elizabeth Eckford, one of the Little Rock Nine, facing hostility as she attempted to enter Little Rock's all-white Central High School in 1957, a defining moment in the struggle for civil rights. A photo taken around 1942 shows a young Princess Elizabeth, years before she would take the throne, offering a glimpse of her youth long before she became Queen Elizabeth II. Another photograph shows a brave tunnel rat preparing to descend into a Viet Cong tunnel sometime during the 1960s, taking on the dangerous job of searching for and clearing mines hidden within the underground network. Photographed together not long before their tragic execution in 1918, the 4 Grand Duchesses, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, appear side by side, representing the final generation of Russia's imperial family. Toward the end of the 19th century, a 17-year-old hairdresser named Oso Watari made quite an impression in Paris with his striking look, photographed in traditional Japanese dress, complete with a large sword, a picture that captures the cultural mixing of that era. Another photograph shows an enormous pile of wedding rings, items stripped from Holocaust victims by the Nazis, taken around 1945. During the 1999 Kargil War, Indian soldiers were photographed burying the bodies of unidentified soldiers that India claimed were Pakistani. A grim reminder that even in death, conflict and dispute can continue. On the 25th of December 1940, families gathered to celebrate Christmas inside a bomb shelter in London, finding moments of hope and togetherness even amid the terror of the Second World War. In 1945, an American soldier is photographed kissing his girlfriend in Hyde Park, London, with no way of knowing whether they would ever see each other again. A picture that captures both the hope and the uncertainty that came with wartime love. Another photograph shows a fighter with an anti-fascist militia during the Spanish Civil War in 1936, right as General Francisco Franco's forces launched their uprising against the country's democratically elected government. A photograph from the late 1800s shows the Statue of Liberty under construction, a gift from France to the United States, marking the 100th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Another photograph shows Judge Roy Bean, one of the more colorful figures of the Wild West, presiding over court inside his own saloon during the 1800s, a symbol of frontier-style justice. A photograph from 1910 shows a young newspaper boy named Michael selling papers in the middle of a rainstorm, just days after recovering from pneumonia, a picture that speaks to the resilience and hardship faced by children of that time. Queen Elizabeth II is captured laughing alongside President Ronald Reagan during a speech, a picture that reveals a lighter, more personal side to the relationship between the two leaders. Another photograph shows Tsar Nicholas II of Russia together with King George V of England, cousins by blood and close friends besides, offering a rare glimpse into the personal bond between two of Europe's most powerful figures. A haunting photograph from the 16th of April, 1945, shows the horrifying conditions inside the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, revealing the suffering endured by prisoners there during the final days of the Second World War. A photograph of Frederick Douglass taken in 1865, one of the most influential abolitionists in American history, captures his composed presence and his unwavering dedication to the fight for freedom and equality. In 1931, mobsters who otherwise feared nothing were photographed covering their faces to avoid the camera during Al Capone's trial. A photograph from 1938 shows children standing in front of what was once the world's largest log cabin, built in 1905 for Portland's Lewis and Clark Centennial Exposition. The structure remained standing until it was destroyed by fire in 1964. In 1948, with Soviet forces blockading West Berlin, American aircraft flew in desperately needed food and supplies. A photograph from that period captures the gratitude of the city's residents as the planes touched down, part of an airlift that continued until the blockade ended on the 12th of May, 1949. In 1945, as the war drew to a close, the Nazis attempted to clear out concentration camps before Allied forces could reach them. A photograph shows Jewish prisoners who had been rescued from a train meant to carry them further into captivity, marking their escape to freedom. A photograph shows a 27-year-old Robin Williams, taken just weeks after Mork and Mindy premiered, on his way to Studio 54 in New York in 1978 to mark his sudden rise to fame. A moving photograph captures the funeral procession for President Abraham Lincoln as it made its way through New York City on the 25th of April, 1865, following his assassination, a solemn scene reflecting the nation's grief over the loss of its leader. By 1944, there were only 247 Black nurses serving in the United States Army Nurse Corps. This photograph brings attention to the obstacles they faced within a segregated military and their part in the broader fight for equality. A powerful photograph taken by Matthew Brady shows a wounded soldier during the American Civil War, offering an unflinching look at the brutal reality of combat. During the First World War, soldiers and even their mule are pictured wearing gas masks, a stark illustration of the devastating effects of chemical weapons like mustard gas and chlorine gas. Taken by Felice Beato in the late 1860s, this photograph shows a group of Japanese officers, offering a rare look at everyday life and military dress during the Meiji era. In 1934, acrobats Charlie Smith, Jewel Walk, and Jimmy Karayan are photographed performing a daring balancing act atop the Empire State Building, twisting their bodies together to form a human statue high above the streets of New York City. Betty White, later remembered as the First Lady of Television, is pictured here in her early years, at the very beginning of a career that would go on to last more than 80 years and make her one of the most beloved figures in all of entertainment. In 1950, during the Korean War, Bob Hope's entertainment tour brought a welcome dose of relief to soldiers stationed in Seoul. This photograph, showing soldiers laughing together, reflects just how powerful humor can be, even in the darkest of circumstances. At the age of 100, in 1864, William Hutchings, one of the last surviving veterans of the American Revolutionary War, was photographed as living proof of the resilience and sacrifice of the men who fought for America's independence. During the First World War, a Serbian soldier is shown resting beside his father, who had come to visit him near the front lines close to Belgrade. Serbia lost 27% of its population between 1914 and 1918 through both combat and massacres. In 1946, Albert Einstein pushed back against the racial attitudes of his time by visiting Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, the first college in the United States to grant degrees to black students, in order to teach a class there. In October of 1960, John F. Kennedy and his wife Jacqueline are photographed campaigning together in New York, taken just before his election as president on the 8th of November of that same year. In 1965, during a coordinated offensive by North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces, this photograph shows a United States soldier running past a burning building in Saigon, capturing the chaos of the Vietnam War. In 1975, a MiG-21 belonging to the East German Air Force crashed into an apartment building in Cottbus, killing the pilot along with 5 others. A photograph shows boys at the Forest Grove Indian Training School in the late 1800s, where Native American children were forced to abandon their culture and taught trades such as blacksmithing instead. 3 athletes are pictured training ahead of the first modern Olympic Games, held in Athens, Greece in 1896, an event that ushered in a new era of international sports competition. In 1918, a man known as the human squirrel is photographed climbing up the side of a skyscraper in New York City in order to raise money for war relief, showing just how far some people were willing to go for a good cause. Marilyn Lovell is pictured listening to a broadcast describing the dangers her husband, astronaut James A. Lovell, faced aboard the Apollo 13 mission, a deeply personal moment set against the backdrop of a historic space voyage. In April of 1945, Soviet forced laborers were rescued from a cellar after German troops had locked them inside and set the building on fire, a photograph that speaks both to the horror of war and to the resilience of those who survived. A photograph of Albert Einstein taken during the 1930s shows him dressed casually in denim jeans and a leather jacket, capturing the down-to-earth nature of a man who would go on to become a global icon. Taken in 1940 amid the wreckage of the Battle of Britain, this touching photograph shows a young girl clutching her stuffed toy, a small but powerful reflection of the destruction and suffering civilians endured throughout the Second World War. Taken during his 1960 presidential campaign, this photograph shows John F. Kennedy speaking directly with rural voters in West Virginia, reflecting his effort to understand and address the difficulties they faced. Captured in 1941, this image shows a family working together on a farm during a bean harvest, a reminder of how much farm life during that era depended on every member of the household pitching in. This photograph from 1913 shows Franklin D. Roosevelt long before his presidency, at a time when he was serving as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, early experience that would later shape his leadership through some of the nation's most difficult years. In 1945, Army nurses are pictured sunbathing beside a 40-millimeter anti-aircraft gun aboard a Coast Guard troop transport ship as it carried them back home to the United States. On the 9th of August, 1945, just minutes after the Fat Man atomic bomb exploded over Nagasaki, this photograph captures the devastating aftermath of the 21-kiloton blast. This photograph from 1873 shows the young Prince of Naples, later crowned King Victor Emmanuel III of Italy, holding a portrait of his grandfather, Victor Emmanuel II. His eventual reign would be marked by political instability and violence. This photograph from 1861 shows a Catholic priest conducting Mass for Irish Union soldiers inside a makeshift tent during the Civil War. Another photograph documents the historic meeting between Helen Keller and President Dwight Eisenhower, a moment defined by mutual respect and inspiration. A young boy named Jay Bodner is pictured watching televised footage of the moon's surface sent back by Ranger 9, just moments before the spacecraft crashed into a lunar crater, a picture that captures the excitement surrounding the space race. Betty Page, the iconic pinup model of the 1950s, is photographed at the beach, embodying the beauty standards and bold personality that came to define her era. This school photograph from 1898 shows Eleanor Roosevelt at just 14 years old, already on the path toward a life of social service, having begun volunteering to teach immigrant children in New York who were living in poverty. In 1959, Cuban revolutionary leader Fidel Castro visited New York City, drawing considerable attention as a rising political figure in a photograph taken during that memorable trip, just as his influence was beginning to spread internationally. In 1914, a 3-year-old boy named Jose Morel Greenstein from Toronto was photographed wearing an official service uniform as part of the broader war effort, a symbol of how even the youngest members of society were drawn into the cause. In 1941, after seizing control of Athens, German troops are photographed raising the Nazi flag above the Acropolis to mark their victory. This photograph, taken on the 4th of May, 1916, shows a French biplane conducting an aerial survey over a camp near Paris. In 1945, as the Second World War neared its end, the Germans attempted to move prisoners out of the concentration camps. This photograph captures the moment survivors were finally set free, a turning point etched into history. A photograph from 1908 shows a child laborer gazing out through a factory window, another grim reflection of the child labor conditions common in the early 20th century. On the 6th of June, 1944, during the D-Day landings, Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy, and this photograph marks a defining moment in the liberation of Western Europe from Nazi control. On the 30th of November, 1939, during the Winter War, Soviet bombers targeted Helsinki. This photograph shows Finnish civilians taking shelter as air raid sirens sounded, a striking image of how the war disrupted ordinary daily life. In 1924, baseball legend Babe Ruth, even while serving with the National Guard, was still frequently found out on the baseball diamond. This photograph shows him during his time in military service, still very much a symbol of America's favorite pastime. During the Second World War, Japanese Americans were forcibly relocated to internment camps. This photograph shows women waiting to be transported, illustrating the toll of wartime prejudice. Gama, full name Ghulam Mohammad Baksh, known as the Great Gama, was a legendary wrestler from British India who went undefeated as world champion beginning in 1910. This photograph from 1945 captures a strikingly futuristic fashion style, reflecting the era's fascination with imagining what the future might look like. The lion pictured here, named Jackie, is the well-known MGM lion, whose roar famously opened The Wizard of Oz. Salvador Dali, the eccentric surrealist painter, is photographed working on storyboards for the film Destino in 1945. His collaboration with Walt Disney was set aside for decades before it finally saw the light of day, a lasting testament to his creative vision. This photograph of the Titanic's stern was taken by photographer Thomas Barker on the 11th of April, 1912, during the ship's brief stop in Queenstown, Ireland.